Asheville, North Carolina, otherwise known as Beer City, USA.
Asheville.
We are in Asheville.
Here we are in Asheville, North Carolina.
I heart Asheville.
Asheville's beer-making scene has become well established.
Asheville, North Carolina is the intersection of very disparate cultural forces. It's a hippie mountain town in the Bible Belt, an anti-establishment artist paradise in a red state, and somehow one of the most robust craft beer scenes in the world, despite having some of the strictest alcohol laws in the nation. Let's get into it.
Asheville's modern craft beer scene began in earnest in the 90s when Highland Brewing Company opened. The idea of drinking craft beer was so new that the founder kept a keg in his trunk to give out free samples to try to convince the locals to drink it. And it worked. More breweries opened throughout the late 90s and the mid-2000s until Asheville had the most breweries per capita of anywhere in the U.S. Craft brewing giants Sierra Nevada and New Belgium opened their East Coast headquarters in Asheville in 2014 and 2016, respectively. Today, while breweries can be found all over Asheville, there are two main places to drink. The first is South Slope, which is here. This is where you'll find Burial, Highwire, Twin Leaf, and Asheville Brewing Company. The second is Biltmore Village, which is here. It was built by and named for the Vanderbilt family, whose estate is also in Asheville. Biltmore Village is home to Catawba Brewing, Thirsty Monk, and Sweeten Creek. But even though Asheville experienced a brewery boom in the 90s, the story of beer in Asheville started much earlier. It goes all the way back to the very beginning of human settlement in the Appalachian Mountains. The people indigenous to the area include the Cherokee tribe. The Cherokee brewed a corn-based beer, which they used for ritual purposes. When the first European settlers arrived in the 1700s, they also had a culture around beer, bringing a warm, sweet version with them. Because of difficult mountain roads, home brewing became a necessity. The women of each household were typically in charge of brewing by fermenting whatever they could find. And since ginger grows wild in the mountains, ginger beer was particularly common. The city of Asheville was originally a hub for livestock, so corn was cultivated as animal feed.
Leftover grain was brewed into small batch corn beer and whiskey. There's evidence of small breweries in Asheville as far back as the 1870s. Even though women were driving beer production, they were banned from breweries and saloons. Just doing my part to rectify that today. Prohibition was a big shift in Asheville culture.
Social life and community activities centered around drinking. Originally, churches were on board with the heavy drinking culture, with religious leaders drinking and even producing their own alcohol. By the end of the 1800s, Baptist and Methodist churches both adopted hard stances against alcohol that, for Southern Baptists, continued to this day. The church's stance, along with violence in the bar district, resulted in Asheville banning alcohol in 1907, a full 12 years before the rest of the nation.
During Prohibition, brewing actually increased, with people going back to the earlier tradition of home brewing. Some speakeasies even skirted the restrictions by selling tickets to see exotic animals and then giving patrons a free shot of whiskey.
The rest of the country legalized alcohol by voting in favor of the 21st Amendment, repealing Prohibition. The Carolinas actually voted against the 21st Amendment and kept tight alcohol restrictions in place. Light 3.2% beer was the only legal beer. Legal sales didn't start in Asheville until 1933, so alcohol was illegal in Asheville for nearly twice as long as the rest of the nation.
But as we know, Prohibition did end. 5 years later, the North Carolina government passed an alcohol beverage control law that put the sale of spirits under government control. The law also set up tight restrictions around the sale of beer and wine, including labeling and product approval, advertising and event restrictions, and financial and inventory reporting. Asheville breweries are still subject to these restrictions to this day. The ABC law even came with its own police, the Alcohol Law Enforcement Agency, otherwise known as ALE. ALE polices breweries to make sure they're following the restrictions. Asheville's alcohol restrictions lasted an astoundingly long time, and they're a big reason the craft beer resurgence hit so hard in the early 2000s. Selling spirits by the glass was illegal until 1978. Brew pubs, which are breweries/restaurants, were illegal until 1985, and tap rooms were illegal until 2004.
Asheville's puritanical alcohol laws had some surprising consequences. They led to a strong culture of home brewing, which naturally led to homebrewers selling their beer in small batches, which turned into a rich framework of local breweries.
The laws also protected craft brewers from the big beer industry.
They banned big beer from using competitive practices like paying retailers to put their brand on draft, advertising with branded t-shirts on bartenders, and paying for a venue's advertising costs. Without these measures, many small breweries could have been wiped off the map and replaced with a few industry giants. Instead, the big beer companies managed to acquire only one of Asheville's independent breweries. Asheville's beer scene today is full of unique and unusual local craft beer producers. You can go to Burial for death-themed floral-infused beer, Highwire for circus-themed beer, and Ginger's Revenge for Appalachian-grown ginger beer reminiscent of 1785.
By conventional wisdom, craft beer shouldn't work in Asheville. It's remote and high up in the mountains, governed by antiquated Prohibition-era laws, and seemingly ripe for corporate domination of the market. But unexpectedly, these three factors conspire to make Asheville a cradle of unconventional local craft brews. And just a good old place to drink.
Thank you so much for watching. If you're now planning a trip to the Appalachian Mountains to go drinking, you might want to check out a Bright Trip course on how to plan a camping trip, how to document your trip, or how to pack like a pro. You can find all this and more at brighttrip.com. Until next time.